Okay, so Dr. Doug McGuff, ER physician, high intensity training expert, and author of Body by Science and the Body by Science question and answer book, and owner of Ultimate Exercise. And thanks for coming on again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Just wanted to start by asking you kind of what you've been up to. I mean, it's been probably almost a year since we last spoke.
Holy cow, really?
I'd just really be interested if you can concisely explain it, I suppose.
You know, I've not been up to anything significantly different than last year. I mean, it's just, working in the ER, running the facility, just trying to kind of keep up with it all. On the professional sides of things, lots of turmoil in the world of medicine. So just been kind of dealing with that over the past year. But in terms of, workout, diet, things of that nature, not a whole lot has changed. I think I've become a little bit more adept at recognizing ahead of time when I need to kind of do the ebb and flow between, volume, intensity, and recovery time, making those adjustments before the fact rather than after the fact. So I'm getting better at that.
Good. Sounds good. I heard on the grapevine you're releasing a new book. Is that true?
That is, right now it is in the process of final edits and being turned in at the end of December.
Oh, cool.
So that will go in, but that one is on the state of the United States healthcare system, kind of a retrospective of how it got where it is, where it's going, and why you don't want to be in it, and how to stay out of the belly of the beast.
Great. No, it sounds good, and it sounds interesting, and I definitely will look into it once you've published it.
Yep.
Cool. Good stuff. Okay, so wanted to start off talking about and asking you some things about fat loss.
Okay.
I'm currently doing your three-way split in Body by Science. I've progressed to that point.
Okay.
Where I've had to extend my recovery time by doing, body parts more directly every 21 days.
Yeah.
And I'm enjoying that. I've only just come around to doing this it once more. So I've done it all the way through once, and I'm just coming on to doing the second part of the second go, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And I was wondering, into sort of fat loss and trying to trigger the amplification cascade, because you're not perhaps having as much, you're not emptying the glycogen reserves like you would if you were doing the big five in one go. Does that mean that a three-way split is less effective at fat loss?
Not less effective necessarily. It has to be put in the proper context. So if you're at the point where your recovery is now requiring that you do that, if it's an option between going to a three-way split and maintaining your recovery versus sticking with a big five and trying to hammer it out, in terms of fat loss, you're better doing the split. Because what's really going to slam the brakes on fat loss and, the productivity of your workout is not being able to recover from it on a workout by workout basis, and then gradually accumulating a gradual stair-step increase in your cortisol over time as a result of the increased stressor. The other thing you got to keep in mind is that while it seems like less of a glycogen dump than what it would normally be, it actually isn't, because you have to remember that, number one, now you have a bigger reservoir than you used to have, both in terms of your storage capabilities, and hopefully you've put on some muscle size, so just the size of the tank itself is increased, but also the ability to store glucose has been somewhat augmented. But you're now bigger, stronger, and able to inflict more work per unit of time in that smaller workout. So if we were actually, and this is kind of an academic activity, but if you were actually to calculate your workload in foot-pound seconds of when you started your big five versus when you make this transition to a split routine, you may find that the actual workload that your body is facing may be the same or maybe even a little bit more, which is one of the major reasons that necessitated you having to move on to that split. So,
right.
But I think the bigger issue is not concerning yourself with the activity level of the exercise you're doing as a major component in your fat loss. Whether it be burning calories or emptying glycogen stores or anything of that nature, that part of the contribution is not really that great. The bigger part of the contribution is being cognizant of what you're eating, what you're putting in your pie hole, and the hormonal environment in which you're doing it. So you want to make sure that you're just optimizing the environment and then paying attention to your diet. And if you're really focused on fat loss, then, we all know what we should and should not be eating and the amounts that we should and should not be eating. That's the simple part. The hard part is just doing it.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. What, just talking about, I guess, fat loss in general, and I know you often, due to the stress that high intensity training can cause, you sometimes say to people that they should focus on their diet first and foremost, and then maybe introduce training. What are your kind of best strategies for effective fat loss? Like if someone wants to lose quite a bit of body fat, what would you subscribe them to do?
Well, first and foremost is that, the workout's a given. So let's just count that as you're going to do that, because I think what that does, particularly for someone that has a lot of body fat to lose, is from a hormonal metabolic standpoint, it sets you up to win. Okay, at least creates the environment that's permissive for it to happen in the first place. So by, triggering the myokines that favor energy shunting towards lean tissue rather than fat storage, by emptying glycogen stores, improving insulin sensitivity, you're doing all you can do to make the environment permissible for fat loss. And then after that, I really think it is important to focus, number one, on the diet in terms of its nutrient density and its energy density, but also to focus on all the hygiene aspects of your life in terms of making sure that your stress is managed well, that your hydration is managed well, that you're getting adequate sleep. All of those things are a prerequisite for the energy deficit and the hormonal changes that you need for fat loss. If you have those things in line, but the other things are not there to act permissively to let it happen optimally, it's going to be much, much more challenging, and you're going to lose motivation quickly.
Okay, cool. I was thinking about dairy, and a lot of people, even the people who are kind of in the high fat paleo-ish type of movement, they do recommend some cheeses, some raw cheese and different dairy sources. And I remember Tim Ferriss saying in 4 Hour Body about how dairy has a high insulinic index, and how actually it can spike insulin much like carbohydrate, and that one should avoid it if they're trying to lose body fat. Do you agree with that?
To some extent. I really don't like to try to label any particular food group, macronutrient as not permissible or that you should avoid it, because what you can end up doing is through the act of denial, end up creating an intense craving and an opportunity to fall off the wagon. What I like to do is on those kind of foods that have those sort of issues, and dairy does have that kind of issue, that I try to have people orient themselves towards that particular food as something to be used as a condiment or an enhancement rather than a staple. What goes wrong with a quote paleo or a low carb or any other approach that relies on exclusion to some extent is that you find a way of eating all sorts of bad things that are not on the forbidden list. So you end up saying, "Oh yeah, I'm on a low carb ketogenic paleo diet," but you're eating peanut butter by the spoonful, having your bulletproof coffee in the morning, and just eating a bunch of calorie dense crap, rather than really relying on a more well-rounded diet. I mean, it's a tricky thing to not find a pathway to use food to meet your emotional needs, rather than your nutrient needs. Lately, I have found that, well, let me go back to answer your question. I do think dairy, it has a lot of lactose in it, which is dairy sugar. It is more insulinogenic. And in the way that is most commonly approved for either paleo or low carb diets, it's going to be relatively calorie dense. So if you go crazy with it, you may end up shooting yourself in the foot over it. I myself, when I'm just following a ancestral diet type heuristic to guide my diet, what I found is if I need to get my body fat down, if I need to go from 13% body fat down to 9%, I can almost entirely do it by cutting out dairy and nuts. Nothing else about the diet changes. It's just like, okay, no more nuts, no more dairy, no more cheese, skip the butter, use something else. And just doing that alone is enough to make the difference for me without having to get real intensive about counting. But what I've been telling people about my orientation to diet in the recent past is that I have found that the more I've really tried to dive deep and get scientific about it, the more confused I get. And what I found has worked for me is the simplest heuristic possible. And the simplest heuristic I can come up with is I try to think of diet as a straight line between me and the sun. And it can be as direct as being out in the sun and converting vitamin D3 in the skin, along with other things that we may not even know about. Or it can be eating plants that have converted sunlight energy through photosynthesis into energy, or eating the animals that ate those plants and on up the food chain. Whenever you deviate off that straight line to eat anything that's had to be significantly processed, no matter what category it falls into, I think that's where you're going to have the sort of signal disruptions that make optimizing your body composition more challenging. So when I think in the simplest, grossest heuristic possible, I find it is easier for me to stay on track with my diet.
Yeah, no, I do like that heuristic, and I've heard you mention it before, and it's a simplistic way to look at it. I got to throw you a slight curveball because I've been doing the slow carb diet for a long time now. I'm very open-minded about it. Like, I like to experiment with different things. And what I did for about a week is I decided I'll come off the diet, and I'm going to eat well. I'm not going to have a cheat day. But what I'll do is I'll add a bit of white rice in here and there. I'll have some cheese. I'll have some sugar in my tea now and again. And maybe, on the weekends if I'm going out for dinner, I'll cheat. But what I found in doing that is whenever the opportunity came up to cheat, I did so.
Right.
And what I like about the slow carb, from my point of view, is I like the fact that it's all or nothing. Don't get me wrong, I tend not to go mad now on cheat days. I tend to have some bad food, but I don't go nuts.
Right.
Excuse the pun. And I think this brings me back to actually decision fatigue.
Right.
And I think I love the fact that I've pretty much automated my nutritional decisions. So every day at work, I still work, a 9 till 5. I don't know if I'm assuming you still do as well, or to a point.
It's not 9 to 5.
That's more intense.
That's still work, but it's 7 to 3, 3 to 11, 5 p.m. to 1 a.m., and 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. on a rotating basis. So
you make me look bad.
And 9 to 5 looks like a fantasy world to me right now.
All right. So I find for me, I I quite often for lunch, I go to Chipotle and I have the salad bowl.
Yeah.
And I don't have to think about it. It's like I've already made that decision before I go.
Right.
That's where I find that kind of perspective on diet helpful.
Yeah.
What's your view on that?
I tend to agree. Now, I've given you my gross heuristic and not being real restrictive, but I just, I think what drives a lot of that is just reading the arguments on the internet about it. And I mean, it gets like, Shiites and Sunnis. I mean, it gets really intense, and I think that's just kind of ridiculous. But from a personal standpoint, the problem that we all face is that what is available to us is infinite. And the decision fatigue that you talk about is a real problem, particularly when you combine decision fatigue with a very powerful evolutionary instinct like hunger. So
Yeah.
that's a deadly combination. So having, I'm very much like you. I have maybe 2 standard breakfasts. I have 2 or 3 standard lunches, and I have 4 or 5 standard dinners, and it's pretty much, that's it. It's very pretty narrow and boring. But I do find that if I'm presented with a circumstance, I don't want to use that technique of avoiding decision fatigue in a way that if I have a slice of bread or if I decide to have rice at Chipotle, I don't feel like I got to call the liver transplant team because I did it,
Yeah.
I mean, I just, I want to eliminate the decision fatigue without creating, a neurosis about it at the same time. And it's not so much about what I do or don't do. It's just how I think about it, because I tend to be an OCD type of person, and I got to be careful with it, because if you let what really is a decision fatigue avoidance mechanism turn into something that's OCD, then it loses its utility for me. But I'm that way with all sorts of things. I mean, for lack of a better way of putting it, I mean, what I wear every day is almost just a uniform, I mean, it's a pair of Levi's jeans, it's a certain type of t-shirt, and I don't have to decide what I'm wearing on any given day. And I sure as hell don't got to decide it when I go to work, because, it's a pair of scrubs and that's it, So.
No, that's interesting. It's something I've only recently learned about, obviously through Tim Ferriss's blog, and I've started looking at where I can implement it in my life, and it's just helped me a lot. But that's really interesting what you say, and I'll definitely be wary of that neurosis. Give us a snapshot of your diet, like an average day. What does your diet look like? What do you have for breakfast, lunch, dinner, etc.?
Well, typically, a lot of times breakfast is missed entirely, particularly if I work a late shift. So if I work 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., that usually means I get off around midnight or 1, home by 1:30 or 2. 5 p.m. to 1 a.m., push that out a couple of hours, so I'm getting to bed at 3 in the morning. So I wake up and you just don't feel like eating, So a lot of times, the first meal of the day will get pushed out to around 1 p.m. And at that point, it may be a few eggs. I'll pick some rosemary off the bush outside the back patio and cure that up in some coconut oil and cook the eggs in that. Maybe have a little bit of bacon with it. Sometimes I'll eat a packet of tuna with it, and some fruit, and another option is to have some berries and some Greek yogurt kind of mixed together. If I'm going to work, it's going to be the best quality beef jerky I can find to bring with me. A piece of fruit, packet of tuna, things like that. I mean, it's incredibly simple. When I go out to eat, it's like I try to aim for some place like Chipotle where I can get, romaine lettuce and chicken and guacamole and things of that nature. So I try to stay within an ancestral diet paradigm, but I'm not one of these people that's able to be at home all the time really cooking these beautiful food porn type paleo meals, you know.
Cool. Go on, sorry, yeah.
I was going to give a confessional here too, though, but one of the biggest problems for me in body composition and keeping my diet good is the environment in which I work, which is a very high stress environment, an environment where people bring into the kind of a little cubby hole in the ER all sorts of horrible snacks. You know, there's always, you know, M&Ms, candy bars, donuts, chips, you know, you name it, anything bad that's not on the list is there. And it's in a room where I have to go because the computer for reading x-rays is there and you have to go in there. And if you have a stressful encounter or if you're just getting pushed beyond your level of comfort, it's very hard to avoid partaking of the stuff that's in there. So that's a real downfall for me.
Just on that, that's just if I can interject. I've noticed that if I have a lack of sleep or I feel stressed, I do crave carbohydrate and I crave the sugars. Can you explain to me why that is? I think I know, but I'd like your perspective.
Tell me what you think, because I'm not really sure I know.
Oh wow, okay. My thoughts were looking at it purely from I guess hunter-gatherer point of view. Was that if you are sleep deprived, then your body feels like, have I got that right? Oh wow, I can't even remember how I explained it. I think you really put me on the spot.
It's all right.
But it's something about
how... I was going to teach you something and then I left you in the lurch.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're kind of right, but I think that you're correct in terms of thinking about it in evolutionary terms, but when I think about it in evolutionary terms, but with a modern twist. And I think the modern twist is that so much of what we eat has a very serotonergic effect to it. So when you're feeling that stress, or you've just been stressed by a high volume of, you know, critical decisions or scenarios where the environment is artificially stressful and you've just kind of tapped out your serotonin reserves, there's a lot in the crap that's available to us to give you a little serotonin spike. And some of that is just the effect of the sugar. Some of it is the effect of the processing. You know, I mean, a lot of the grain proteins that are used as emulsifying agents, the hydrolyzed wheat proteins and such, create molecules that occupy your umami receptor and, you know, make you feel happy and yummy, but also simultaneously drive your appetite and make you hungrier, even though you've consumed something of significant calorie load. So I think it's sort of a perfect storm of our evolutionary past and some modern manufactured foodstuffs that create signal disruptions that both give us a little serotonin spike, but at the same time keep us craving and wanting more. And I think the food scientists that are involved in manufacturing processed foods are probably well aware of that and very adept at exploiting it.
That's a good answer. I'd completely forgotten what I was trying to articulate now, but you kind of explained it there.
I don't know if that's I'm not saying that that's fact. I'm just saying that that's kind of my theory.
Yeah, no.
And the hard part is that it's just there. It's available. It's right there in front of your face calling to you. It's very tempting.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to just query something in your book, actually, something in Body by Science. You mentioned, you know, flipping the script now, moving away from fat loss but over to muscle gain. You mentioned if someone wants to get maximum benefit from high intensity training, they require, and in quotations, adequate nutrition, but not excessive, close quotations. Can you elaborate on that?
I think the point of that, and this is the hard part with these sort of questions, is, you know, you write this book 5 years ago now, and then it goes through this massive editing process, and someone finds a sentence and says, oh yeah, and you said this, and you're kind of like, did I say that? it's really, every time someone plucks a little snippet out of the book, you're like, oh crap, that sounds right, but did I really say that? But I think that's something that in the process of writing the book that me and John Little spoke about to some extent is, and I think it came up in the context of the supplement industry and how this whole notion that by supplying lots of raw materials that you can push the anabolic process along by giving it lots of substrate. And I think that notion is not correct. I think if the stimulus is adequate, you need adequate substrate for that stimulus to take the substrate and make a response out of it. But I don't think that if you front load the process by trying to really push more substrate through the assembly line, I don't think that that enhances the anabolic response, and the stress of having to deal with all that nutritional excess may actually tax your body in such a way that it actually makes the anabolic response worse. I mean, if you're really pushing, branched chain amino acids or whey protein and really pushing large amounts of it, thinking that you can drive the process by pushing the substrate through, I think a lot of processes that have to go on metabolically through the liver may not be able to be carried out because they're so busy trying to take a bunch of amino acid dump through gluconeogenesis because you were trying to push this process. And I think that's maybe what we were discussing there, is just what the supplement industry exploits, is that you can push or drive this process along by jamming extra substrate through the system.
That leads me to two questions, actually. So do you think that the saying that, or the heuristic that we should get 1 to 1.5 grams of protein per pound of lean mass to gain muscle mass is actually incorrect?
That's one of those, that's almost just become a meme that cannot be killed. It's like, 220 minus your age times whatever, that's your target heart rate. It's like, I don't even know how to address that anymore. Other than, I don't think your body works on that kind of accounting system. Because when you make that sort of accounting system, you're doing it in the context of a 24-hour day, 1 to 1.5 gram per kilogram body weight per 24 hours. But from an evolutionary standpoint, we never got all of our grams of protein in within that 24-hour time block.
Yeah.
And, if you look at people in hunter-gatherer societies, they are generally a lot more muscular than your average person in an industrialized society. So just on the surface, it doesn't pass the sniff test. But placed in the context of someone that is training on a regimented, regular schedule with the intent of invoking a muscle mass gain, you have to realize that that sort of algebraic, accounting-based training schedule of just hammering, whether it's, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, this, these body parts this many times per week, this many times per day. When you apply that sort of artificial stressor to the system, might that become necessary? Yeah, maybe. I mean, your caloric requirements are going to be higher, your protein requirements are going to be higher, but I guess what I'm saying is that 1 to 1.5 gram per kilo per day comes out of that paradigm. And what I want to drive home with that is not just that maybe that protein requirement isn't necessary, but the type of training that generated the assumption of that protein requirement is also not necessary.
Yeah.
So if you're doing a more directed, focused, abbreviated training program, you're going to potentially get better results because you're operating within the constraints of your own genetic limitations for recovery ability, and therefore you're not going to have to expose yourself to that degree of nutritional stress to meet your adaptive needs either.
Okay.
So.
Also, just on that, one of the things I think my mindset has definitely matured around this sort of stuff, because I used to think, I'm a lean guy. I used to think, I just want to get, increase lean muscle mass. And more so lately, I'm more concerned about, I want longevity and quality of life, and I want to look after my body and have that for as long as I can. Would you suggest that, eating, a very high, a diet that's very high in calories, even if it's healthy, or has healthy macronutrients, it's still not great it doesn't promote longevity because your body's working so hard to convert that substrate?
Yeah, I mean, that's potentially, that's all theoretical. Just a high nutrient load over a long span of time is potentially going to be damaging, yes. And you're potentially going to induce a imbalance between your anabolic and catabolic state, which is sort of a yin-yang balance that seems to be necessary for longevity, and that might mess that up. But I think the thing, I'm turning 53 here shortly.
Surely no.
Yeah, and so, as you get older, you're kind of like, once you pass about 48 or 50, you kind of start to make this realization, there's not one good thing about getting older. It all sucks. So you really are trying, or at least I am trying, tooth and nail to still get better every year, no matter what. And for certain, when I was in my 30s, all I really gave a shit about was trying to get stronger and more muscular and bigger and more aesthetically appealing, because that was just kind of my obsession, and health just kind of fell by the wayside. But I think it's fortunate that my influences in training and the people that I admired led me down a pathway that made you realize that the only way you can become superhuman is to acknowledge that you're only human. That this whole notion that, you can turn your entire life into Navy SEALs BUDS training and that it's going to work is just stupid. Eventually you have to realize, in order to generate the type of gains I'm looking for, those have to be coaxed through a very intelligent approach that acknowledges the biological limits of your own body. And that every time you try to push that envelope into this realm of fantasy, you end up losing ground. So once you learn to have the discipline, treat yourself as only human, to apply the stimulus intelligently, and to allow for recovery in a realm that you may not be completely comfortable with, and then have the patience to see how it works or doesn't work, is what really makes the difference in the long run. And then having done that, having had the time to figure out what really does work and what's actually produced some results, you will also realize that by its very nature defines what enhances longevity. What the problem is our faulty assumptions about what might drive maximum gains. That if we just push the training more and push the nutrition more and maybe took this or that drug, that we would get to where we wanted to be, when in fact, what is necessary for us to produce those kind of results is a sort of behavior and approach that will result in more longevity.
Okay.
The two are not mutually exclusive, I guess is what I'm saying. They're married together, and unfortunately, I think sometimes, at least it took me until I was older than I would like to admit to kind of come to that conclusion.
Okay, no, I appreciate your honesty. Couple technical questions I had. It's funny, when I first came across some of your thinking, I was met with a challenge from a friend of mine who, has done a master's in sports exercise. And I was telling him about how, when you apply a stimulus to the body, you require, X amount of time to recover. Most people roughly around a week. And he said, well, no, because of supercompensation, which is what he started talking about, which is where you train 48 hours after you induce muscular fatigue, which with you to stimulate the muscle before it's able to fully recover. Now, is there you come across that before, that kind of supercompensation?
Yeah, and I actually experimented with it.
Okay.
If you actually go to, I have an old website, way old, like in the Wayback Machine old website. It still has a lot of articles on it. But at ultimate-exercise.com, there was an article called The Anamnestic Response, in which I actually experimented with that by doing a really hard workout and then repeating the identical workout the next day, and finding that my performance in terms of amount of weight used and time under load till I reached failure on the second day was actually significantly better than on the first day.
That's fascinating. And
that held true for, probably 8 or 10 cycles. And then the wheels came off. And I think really what was happening was more of a neuromotor priming from one workout to the next than any really true enhancements of the stimulus-response relationship. But the other danger in my discussions, both in Body by Science and in previous articles that I've written, interviews I've given and whatnot, the concomitant danger in my approach is that stimulus and recovery on the other end of the spectrum, on my end of the spectrum, are also not algebraic. Okay, this is a very dynamic thing. It's not like you do a workout and it takes 7 days to recover for the average person. If you come back at 4 days, you're just screwed. And for instance, you've just gone to a 3-way split. I mean, I've been doing this since I was 13 or 14 years old. And I still, depending on how my work schedule is going and what the concurrent stressors in my life are, I still ebb and flow between a 3-way split, a 2-way split, and a total body routine. I will still go back and forth between them, and my frequency can vary to as short as every 4th day, or as long as, in the past year, as long as an entire month between workouts. So it's not this fixed algebraic etched in stone, like you put the stimulus in and a certain amount of time transpires and all of a sudden the little timer goes off and you're good to go. The human body is much too complex to fit into any of those sort of paradigms, even if it's my paradigm about stimulus and recovery and how much time you need. I think that cannot be that dogmatic, but only if you get a really big aerial view of the whole thing and say, on average, you need more recovery than you realize.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Stuff. When you were on your interview with Dr. McCullough, you talked about how, correct me if I'm wrong, but you talked about how when you increase muscular size, you increase the glycogen store. But you also said even if some individuals whose muscles don't increase dramatically, the glycogen store still increases. Is that true?
Yes, to some extent. I mean, glycogen storage capability is a trainable thing. Now, some of it, to some extent, it's limited by the bounds of geometry. I mean, you can only, glycogen is just taking glucose molecules and putting them onto this complex branching structure. that finds its structure by trying to cram the most amount of stuff into the least amount of space. But, you know, the glycogen synthase enzyme and the process of glycogen storage, that can be optimized through a repeated process of training and refeeding. So that is true to, you know, to some extent. The exact quantitative details of that and the exact nature of it, I don't really know. And there may be someone out there that researches that does know to what extent that happens. But it is still true. I mean, even if your muscle size doesn't increase one bit, your insulin sensitivity does improve, your glycogen synthase activity can upregulate, and I am pretty certain that your body can find a more efficient way to pack it in. So, you know, I think the answer to that is a qualified yes. I think that's true.
Okay, cool. What's your views on sitting?
I like the notion of sitting as being the new smoking. I do think, because really, even compared to when I was a kid, the amount of it that we do has just gone off the chain, and it's because we've become such an information society. These sort of interviews and activities occur on Skype. I'm sitting in a chair. You're probably standing up because you're smarter than I am. But
I doubt that very much.
In any case, I think it's become a much bigger part of our activity, and I think it has negatively affected our mobility. And I particularly see it not so much in my generation, but I see it in college-age people particularly severely. I see a general flexion posture. I see a loss of rhomboid tone in their upper back with rounding and hunching of the shoulders. And more than anything, what I see in those people is what I call text neck. And rather than their neck coming straight up off their thoracic spine and pointing straight upward with good posture, what I see is they almost look like giraffes, right, with their neck craning off their body in this forward tilt because they're always looking down and texting. So, you know, I really do believe that what we do repetitively changes us and morphs us physiologically. So I do think it is badness. I think, fortunately for me, it's not much of a problem because of the nature of my work. I do sit a lot, but I sit and get up and sit and get up. And on average, probably, you know, walks many miles per shift, just, you know, running from place to place and room to room. But if I was, you know, someone, you know, doing code or programming 12 hours a day, working in some startup in Silicon Valley, I mean, that could have really negative consequences. I mean, and the consequences for how you feel if, you know, you have, you know, your psoas muscles are chronically in flexion posture, and same thing with your thoracic and cervical spine. I think it really does affect how you function.
Do you think it contributes much to fat gain if you sit down all the time?
I do. And I think it does, not so much for calorie accounting reasons, but I think it does for biological signaling reasons. You know, what we're starting to understand is that skeletal muscle is a very active endocrine organ. And it's probably the most active endocrine organ in our body. And it releases lots of chemical messengers that signal as to how our body ought to behave in terms of partitioning nutrients. So there is a constant, a battle of tension going on between adipose tissue and skeletal muscle. And to the extent that you are not mobile, I mean, you don't have to be doing super high intensity work. Your skeletal muscle just has to be active and moving to send out these chemical messengers that, in the simplest terms I can put it, by being physically active, even at a low level of intensity, what you're signaling to your body is that the diminishing marginal utility of having stored energy is tighter and tighter. Because there could be huge marginal utility of carrying around 40 pounds of body fat in terms of its stored energy value. But that value, if you're active and have to lug it around with you, the marginal utility of that value goes down, and I think the biologic signaling adjusts accordingly. It's like, yes, stored energy is great unless we got to haul it around when we're being active. So I think the biologic signal changes the signal towards a leaner body composition.
Because that's kind of, it doesn't contradict, I suppose, but it's counter to the argument, well, correct me if I'm wrong, that, if you are running, you're doing steady state activity all the time, you're going to lose muscle mass. I guess that's true if you're not applying the stimuli of strength training. But I guess, do you think that what you're saying is that there is perhaps some argument to suggest that steady state activity does induce some fat loss or not?
Well, I don't think it has to be steady state. I think it just has to be plenty of activity. I think we evolved, and I think our hormonal signaling has evolved out of an environment where we had a very high degree of activity. And that activity was probably quite intermittent and very rarely steady state. I think the danger in all of this is not to go down the slippery slope. When I talk about, something that signals for the loss of muscle mass and the holding on to of body fat and the loss of functional ability, I'm talking about, neurotic, sport-based, steady-state activity like being a marathon runner or an ultra-marathon runner. I mean, if you want something that's prescriptive for losing muscle mass and really kind of stinking up your body composition, that would be it. But that's not to say that you should go to the gym, strength train, and go into a hyperbaric chamber until your next workout. You got those two different extremes of the spectrum. I think what happens is, and what I've seen in my own clients training them is, if you get someone strong enough, start sending out these myokine signals, their activity levels spontaneously and organically increase, and they start becoming very active. Now, that may not be steady state activity. Some people may choose to do that as a recreational or sporting activity, or maybe even thinking that it's a conditioning activity. But what is for certain is that once you get someone across a certain threshold of strength, their activity levels go way up. They become a lot more active. They take the stairs. They don't, they walk the longer distances. They go out for walks. They do gardening. They partake of sports, and they do become more active.
Do you have, I don't know if you've ever heard of a guy called Edu Portal?
Say that again?
Edu Portal. No? Or Kelly Starrett?
Kelly Starrett, I do know.
Yeah. Okay. Do you know him personally?
I don't know him personally, and I've never spoken to him, but I've seen, his stuff on the internet. I've seen the Mobility WOD site and things of that nature.
I'm just wondering what your view is on having a movement practice, where I guess I don't have a movement practice myself, but Edu Portal is a movement expert, I think is what some people call him, and he might spend, he works out, all day, every day, because that's his job, that's his living. But he does a lot of these kind of strange crawling movements and crouching, and he really uses his body in what he views it as what it's meant to be used for. I mean, what do you think about that?
I think there is value to it. I think my context for it might be different than theirs. I can't speak for them because I'm really don't have that in-depth knowledge. But my approach to it would be is that I think appropriate strength conditioning that follows congruent exercise principles, a la Bill Day Simone. If anyone does not know him, check out Congruent Exercise on his YouTube channel.
Yep.
But the notion of it is to do high intensity strength training in a manner that follows muscle and joint function. So you're not in any awkward or joint unfriendly position where you're going to get injured, to build your base of strength. But having built that baseline of strength conditioning, I think then you are well suited to partake of this sort of mobility training, because you can be very, very strong, but yet if you get put into a body position that seems awkward to you, you may not be well suited to function with it, because you don't know neurologically how to link up and tie muscle groups together to function in this awkward or challenging position. So I think some combination of really good, say, strength training, but then building in some sort of mobility work as an adjunct to that is, I'm starting to enter the paradigm where I think that's beneficial. And what really drives that home is if you see someone that you know that trains and seems relatively strong and muscular, and you're sitting at a play date with some kids and it's time to get up off the floor, and you notice that they have trouble doing it, kind of like, there is something to this. But I think the idea that I would have about it is that it should be adjunctive to your strength training rather than the training that generates your strength. I think you need safe training to generate your strength and mobility training to kind of develop the skill of knowing how to use everything you've got, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely, it does. Strange question, but I notice how well read you are. And I'd really like to just ask you, what are your favorite books that you've read on health and fitness, the ones that have had the biggest impact on you? If you are able to answer that question.
Well, I guess first thing for anyone to understand is like what I've written in Body by Science, which I did with my co-author, John Little, who's also very well versed in high intensity training. Almost none of that outside the whole global metabolic conditioning concept, but none of that is my original thinking.
Sure.
So my thinking has been influenced first in the health and fitness field by reading the original Nautilus training bulletins by Arthur Jones. So I read both those, and I read everything ever written by the man. I read everything written by Mike Mincer, Ellington Darden. There's lots of people that have been influential in my thinking and have taught me stuff. Ken Hutchins from Super Slow. Mike Mincer. There's just tons of different people that have had an influence on me. But more importantly is the reading that's outside the fitness that kind of influences how you look at it. And probably a lot of what has evolved my thinking on fitness has been reading done in the realm of economics. So reading, probably one of the biggest ones that had an influence on me and things in terms of thinking about stimulus intensity, recovery, diminishing marginal utility, and things of that nature has been reading Human Action by Ludwig von Mises, or reading Capitalism by George Reisman. And then kind of what knocked me out of my very algebraic approach to exercise was being able to read works of Nassim Taleb, The Black Swan, Fooled by Randomness, things of that nature. Really had a big influence on kind of changing my thoughts about this very algebraic. You reach a certain level of strength and you decrease your volume and your frequency accordingly, and it was very, very linear. That really changed my thinking about how much I thought I could control.
That's fascinating, and I'm yet to read a lot of Nassim Taleb's books, but I'm really looking forward to reading those eventually.
Yeah.
I'm going to steal one from Dave Asprey here. I know he likes to ask this question at the end, but I just want to see what answer you'd give me. What are your top 5 health and fitness tips for those that will be listening to this?
All right, top 5 health and fitness tips. I think under the umbrella of all of them has to be what I said earlier, and that is to realize that in order to become superhuman, you have to realize that you're only human. So in order to get as big, strong, fast, smart, productive, intelligent, wealthy, whatever it is, that has to be done in a way that honors your biology. You can't fool Mother Nature, so to speak. So that's the one thing. And so under that big heading, I would say that you need to train hard, but keep it brief. And in your workout, at the point where you still would want to keep going some more. So you should end your workout hungering for more, or quitting before you think you should. And you should recover a little bit longer than you think you should. And that you should focus your diet around the simple heuristic that we spoke about earlier, keeping as much of a straight line between you and the sun as possible, because there's lots of things and natural whole food that have yet to be discovered and turned into supplements. That I think that it is important to hydrate well and to sleep well. And I think that's 5 things.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. That's great advice. Do you want to? Obviously, I have some stuff in the show notes in terms of your website and things, but it'd be good for you to just tell people the best way to contact you and find your products and services as well.
Sure. I think probably the best portal to find everything is just to go to drmcguff.com, drmcguff.com. There's a link to the Body by Science blog. There's a link to the YouTube channels. There's a link to consultation. There's a page for my training facility where we do personal training, so you can kind of access everything through that site.
Do you know, there's one more question I want to ask you. How often do you come to the UK?
I've never been to the UK.
No way.
No way.
Oh my God.
I have not.
Would you ever?
I would love to. I would love to get into Europe in general, you know, and
How
I've
come
never
that's
have.
never happened? How come?
I don't know.
Too far to come.
You know, there's been no big invitation. We've intended to go, but, you know, life gets in the way.
Yeah. Well, if you're ever in town, it would be an absolute pleasure to meet you face to face.
Oh yeah. If I'm coming, I'll look you up.
I appreciate it. Because I don't know if you saw, but well, sorry, I won't keep you too long. I know we're at 8:00. There's a really popular podcast in the UK called London Real.
Yeah.
Hosted by a guy called Brian Rose. Are you familiar?
I'm not, but you had sent me the link a while back saying that you were trying to make that introduction and everything.
Yeah. Did anything come of that at all?
I never saw anything, so
No.
It's still out there, I guess.
Okay, because the reason is because Brian Rose is all about interviewing people who are, I just look at the world slightly differently, you know, who, health and fitness guys who can help people get into shape, and then also business gurus and just people who aren't blinded by a lot of the crap in the media and this kind of thing. And I just thought, you know what, it'd be awesome if you were on his show. I just love to see that dynamic.
Well, that kind of show and your kind of show, I think the bigger appeal is not just that those people are open to more unconventional notions of how to exercise and be healthy and stuff, but I think out of necessity, they need to find another way, because the currently popular way does not fit into anyone who values their time. Anyone that is being entrepreneurial or really being productive, their time becomes very, very valuable. And if you're doing, if all your fitness efforts are poured into something that is time inefficient, it's not going to work. So for, your entrepreneurial and your startup types and people that are running their own business, or people that are really busy professionals, even if this wasn't the best way, which I believe it is, they would have to be seeking something like this out. But fortunately, I think it's also the best approach.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I've created a very busy life over the last couple of years. I've just written my first ebook on Kindle, which
Cool.
I'm glad to say is selling really well. And it's called How to Lose a Stone in Under 30 Days and Keep It Off. And it's just a how-to guide. And I share some of your high-intensity training principles and dietary principles. I just, like you, I guess I've taken lots of concepts from different places and put them in one place.
Well, cool. Email me a link to that, and I'll put it up in the next blog post. So that
I'd be really grateful. I'd appreciate it. But yeah, I mean, this your training protocol has made that possible, and I don't think I could ever go back to training regularly. It just wouldn't be conducive to the lifestyle I lead now. So I completely agree. But I will I'll let you return to your very busy lifestyle.
Awesome.
But thank you very much, Doug. I really appreciate it.
I enjoyed it. It was a pleasure.
All the best. Cheers.
All right. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.